very exciting speakers. And I hope we are going to enjoy this conversation. Like Arun said, basically we are looking forward to building global knowledge. This is an intercontinental session on inclusive approach in migration and development. And basically our interest is to see how we can build from crisis to sustainable development. The question has been, how can we look at migration and the refugee population as a solution to development or sustainable development, rather than looking at the refugee or the migrant population as a crisis to the countries of destination. Looking at the concept that we had shared previously, we had given our background, looking at the global migrant and refugee population in different countries. We are looking at the huge humanitarian crisis that they are facing. Some of them do not even get a lot of acceptance in the countries of destination. Others, once they settle in, they're lacking food, they're lacking the most basic items. And worst of it is all that they do not even get that protection. They do not get to enjoy their basic human rights. So why this session then? We were looking at bringing on board experts who have worked in this field for years. They have had enough experience. They have seen the struggles in the field. And probably over time, they have also built, or they have interacted and come up with very strong and durable ways of addressing the refugee crisis globally. As it is said, we are joined by three very important speakers, and they are going to help us look at what is the future. How are we going to support the refugee in terms of building for the future? We are looking at Vision 2030, Vision 2063, how are they related to migration? We are also looking at what is the best and holistic approach towards migration governance in different continents that we are representing? How can we mainstream the migration affairs into our local, national, and international policies globally? And we're also going to listen to a case study by one of our key speakers on refugees and higher education, the accessibility and the opportunities that the refugees enjoy or can enjoy going forward. So I will be introducing my three important speakers. The first speaker is a lady, Brittany Fold. She's a professional consultant in language access, immigration and refugee integration. Currently, Brittany is a consultant in the US with a main focus on refugee immigration policy. She has previously worked with the local government in terms of building local and state welcoming initiative for immigrants and refugees. Looking at the Bosch Alumni Network, she's a Bosch Alumni Fellow. She has worked with the International Center for Policy Advocacy in Berlin, Germany, on strategic communications and narrative change campaigns to support the social cohesion of pro-migrants and pro-refugee communities. So thank you very much, Brittany. We are very much humbled to have you on board. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. The second speaker is Colonel retired Dr. Kasily Mutambo. Currently is the camp manager at Kakuma Refugee Camp and Kalombe Settlement Scheme, one of the largest refugee camps in Kenya and most probably in Africa. He's in charge of the camp administration, camp management, camp coordination of over 50 international and local aid agencies and other 10 UN specialized agencies. And basically this is to deliver protection assistance to the encamped refugees. He holds a PhD from Euclid University, basically the Doctor of Philosophy in Diplomacy and International Affairs. He has a master's in business administration in information security management from SMC University. Thank you very much, Dr. Colonel Kasily Mutambo. Welcome. Very much humbled to meet you again online after I met you in your office. And lastly, we are joined by Mr. Kennedy Munari is an education in emergency specialist, a trainer, a teacher. He's also a researcher, focusing on designing and implementing education projects from emergency phase to post-conflict situation. He comes in very strongly to give a case study on refugee affairs. And basically, he looks at the mechanisms required to ensure the protection of children affected by conflict, disaster, and improving the quality of education during the humanitarian crisis. He has also supported in offering technical and strategic support on any emergency team. He holds a master's in education in emergencies from University of Nairobi. Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. We are highly humbled to have you on board to be part of our main speakers. And lastly, I would like to appreciate Madam Rachel Vichey. She's the Migration Impact Field Host. She's in charge of all this program running for over the next 6 months. And we are very much humbled to have you join us and lead this program together as we grow towards building global knowledge on migration and refugees. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to start the conversation straight away. I hope all my speakers are ready, and I'll be just posing some questions to you unless you have presentations. If you do, then our technical person, Arun, will also support you in sharing the presentations, but we are also open to have you just share your ideas. So yeah, I'll start with Madam Brittany. I hope I've mentioned your name correctly. And I just want to hear from your experience in a minute. What would you say is the refugee status globally? Just in a minute.
Thank you. Yeah, you pronounced my name correctly, so thank you. So the status of refugees globally, I mean, I think the statistics are pretty well known that we have the world's worst refugee crises in the world, worse than World War II. And, you know, many people are often stuck in displaced countries and refugee camps for a very long time because global North countries are not receiving refugees at the rates that you know, international law and you know, international declarations have said that they would. So I think that that's my understanding of the world's refugee crisis. And I like how you talked about how, you know, how can we start reframing you know, migrants and refugees as not being a crisis and being more of an opportunity, and you know, what kind of benefits that they can provide to their potential host communities. And I think that that's a really important conversation to bring to here today.
Thank you very much, Brittany. I am impressed. Dr. Kasily, just in a minute, what would you say about the refugee population or the global refugee crisis that we have?
What I want to share with us is that the refugee issue or problem is on the rise. Since the 1951 Convention on Refugees and its additional 1967 protocol, we have not been able to offer at all durable solutions as expected. So, and of course, no major country or superpower alone can be able to deal with the issues of refugees. So refugee is a global problem, as the earlier speaker had stated, and is also transnational. And increasingly, countries are going offer or putting restrictions in place, others building walls, others processing refugees in the sea, like Australia, Others like Britain, of course, this is what informed Brexit. And of course, recently they came up with Nationality and Border Act. Of course, you can see also the likes of Denmark. So that is a position. It's an issue that is ongoing and has not had any solution. And of course, the UN agency, the UNHCR, was only established on ad hoc basis. And of course, looking at refugee in terms of durable solution together with the IOM. And then on the issues of migrants, we have IOM and ILO, International Labour Organization. So we have many actors with no coherent strategy or regime in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am impressed by that. I'll be bringing on board Mr. Kennedy Munari for the case study. So I'm just going straight to a different question to our two main speakers. And I would like to know, or you can share with our participants. And this conversation is going to be shared in different frameworks, so people will be listening to it in different spaces. Do we have any international or national frameworks that are protecting refugees, asylum seekers, migrants? And if we do, are they strong enough, or do we still have some gaps that we are still struggling with? Maybe Dr. Kasily, you can go first.
Thank you very much. A very good question, very interesting. Yes, the national acts in place, but as they say that politics is local. So when citizens will now complain, it puts pressure on the governments. And what the governments have done is to impose restrictions. Then also elsewhere, and this is the case of Europe, there is nationalist group or politics has turned to the extreme right. They are forcing also governments to have or to impose restrictions. So this is more of what the international relations will call, scholars will call realism. They want to protect the territory and sovereignty on the basis of identity, and they want to exclude, which is opposed to the liberalism school of thought, that we needed to open up, cooperate, collaborate, so that we can give or offer solutions. So yes, like in my own country, this March, I think it was on 24th, they just came up with a 14 days notice to UNHCR to come up with a roadmap for camp closure. Of course, UNHCR presented it, and it was outrightly rejected. But through negotiation, it has been extended to June next year. The same issue is at the High Court. And the High Court also pronounced itself on this, and I've taken it to appeals court. And maybe hearing and determination will be in the first quarter of 2022. So increasingly, yes, we know there is what they call pacta sunt servanda, that if you enter into a treaty or agreement, you must implement it in good faith. But increasingly, local politics is forcing government to adopt a shift to harden borders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasily. Madam Brittany?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Dr. Kasily said is completely, correct. I mean, I think that a lot of what we are seeing with the world, quote unquote, refugee crisis is a lack of political will and not a lack of, legal frameworks that are supposed to guide humanitarian and equitable migration. And so, I think that there are international laws that guide this. There's also, some things that my field often talks about are the global compacts that were passed in the Global Compact for Migration in 2018, and also the Global Compact for Refugees in 2018. What was interesting with both of those is it was the first time that I know of that cities from around the world inserted themselves into the international debates at the international level around these global compacts to say that we have a voice because we're the ones that are receiving refugee and migrant communities, are integrating them, and a lot of them wanted to insert themselves because national debates oftentimes are very toxic around welcoming migrant and refugee communities. And at the city level, there's been a lot of city leadership around the world to say we do welcome these communities and we want them in our communities. So we want to make sure that we're both a part of the international debates around migration and refugee resettlement, but also that's happening here in the United States at a national level, is that there's several national organizations made up of cities that are advocating to the federal government to to have more inclusive and equitable immigration and refugee policies. So, and I think that that's also happening in Europe as well as other parts of the world as well. And so I think that's a shift that has happened over the last 5 to 10 years in the international migration and refugee space, is the increasing presence of local city leadership saying that we want to make sure that we're being a part of these discussions. But Dr. Kasily is completely right that national politics is influencing how these international laws are being implemented or not implemented. So, here in the United States under President Trump, we, technically still had refugee resettlement programs in place, but he did everything he could to devastate those programs. And so even though year by year he continued to reduce our resettlement numbers from 125,000 under President Obama in 2008 down to 25,000 in the last year that he was in office, those numbers were never met. And so he did everything he could to undermine the system, even though legally those were the laws or those were the rules in place for refugee resettlement. He also did everything in his power to curb legal migration to the United States, whether it was through travel bans and Muslim bans. So, I mean, I think that that's increasingly what we're seeing, unfortunately, in many global North countries is, a very nativist approach to an anti-migrant, anti-refugee sentiment that political leaders are utilizing to exploit in order to win elections. And so, I think that that's something that's going to continue to influence national implementation, national policy making at the local level, as well as, internationally.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Just as a build-up question, now that I've heard from both the speakers that there's a lot of politics that is interfering with the refugee support. So my next question would be, so whose duty is it to support these people? Because one thing is that we understand refugees are human beings. By the time they settle in or they cross any border, there must be some reasons why they are moving. And in most cases, we've seen globally, the largest number of migrants or refugees is caused by conflicts. So whose duty is it to protect these people? Because we are not tagging the name of a human being from a refugee. The fact that you are called a refugee or a migrant or an asylum seeker doesn't detach you from being a human being. So whose duty is it? Kasily?
Thank you, Madam. The duty bearers are the national governments, of course, assisted by the lead agency, the UN Refugee Agency, that is UNHCR. We have other international organizations. We also have international government organizations. We have the NGOs, and we have also the host community, the receiving community. These are persons who should offer this protection assistance to asylum seekers and refugees. But as the earlier speaker, Denise, I believe Akin, spoke, the politics is forcing government to review their positions, and I wish it was not. I don't know whether it is competition for scarce opportunities or resources that they want to exclude the others. So that is a challenge, but the duty bearers, the responsibility lies with the national government. Under many international treaties and obligation lies with the national government to protect the foreigners on its territories. So that is the major duty bearer. But for refugees also, the UNHCR offers international protection, while of course the host government will offer national protection. So this is what I've experienced here. Thank you.
I think I was muted. Maybe before you close out, Dr. Kasily, are they mandated by the law or they do it out of goodwill?
They are mandated by law. They are parties to 1951 convention and it is additional protocol. In Africa, we have 1969 OAU, that is Organization of African Union Convention. So, and then of course, we also have the Refugee Act. And for our own information is that in Kenya, despite the threat of camp closure, the new Refugee Act, known as Refugee Act 2021, has been ascended to by the president and it becomes operational on 24th of February 2022, which gives a better regime or provisions that will allow even movement within the territory of Kenya. But it also restricts what they call onward movers. These are the people who have been registered elsewhere and they feel that maybe in Kakuma or in Kenya there is better protection, so they leave on their own, relocate into Kenya. So such a persons have been excluded in the new act, but generally it also does away with camps. So it allows what we call integration, for them to live side by side with the host community, either in a marketplace, engaged in business, sharing education facilities, medical facilities, sporting facilities, and other many amenities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quite interesting, the Refugee Act and the good thing that it comes with. Brittany?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the primary document, and hopefully this aligns with Dr. Kasily's comments, but the primary document is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that all, United Nations member states have ratified at least a portion of that document that was, developed in 1948 after the failure of many global North communities of not receiving refugees, and more than, 15 million, 20 million people dying in World War II as a result of that. And so I think that, that is a non-binding legal document, but I think that that becomes a basis for a lot of the different laws that the international communities have developed, including in the United States. I know the refugee resettlement laws are specifically, influenced by that document and other international laws, and that how they determine who is considered a refugee in the United States is in part based on language from that document. So really defining whether someone has been persecuted based on their race, religion, social status, then qualifies them for potential refugee resettlement in the United States, or if they're within the United States, to seek asylum. So, and I know that that was somewhat similar. I don't know very specifics. I'm not an international legal scholar, but very similar to the refugee crisis in Europe in 2015 and 16, when many millions also came to places like Germany and were able to seek asylum. So you asked the question, which to me is also a philosophical question of, who has the responsibility, who has the right. And, increasingly in the United States, we have very robust immigrant rights organizations. I think even unlike what I saw in Europe last year when I was there, the increasing debate within those immigrant rights organizations is that, we have the right to be here because you were in our home countries, and so really contending with the history of colonialism and how that still impacts global migration, global refugee crises, and how it's not just a humanitarian issue, but also a moral issue and an equity issue, to increasingly be inclusive of migrant and refugee communities. And increasingly in the United States as well, we're also, many of the organizations that are working in this space are also using economic data to show that, being inclusive of these communities into the United States has been a positive for many of our communities, based on increased in entrepreneurship rates, based on the fact that we have a declining population. If it weren't for migration and immigration to the United States, this is a similar case in most of Europe and most of global North countries, that they have declining populations, and that has real impacts on their ability to meet workforce demands in the coming years. And so in addition to those moral arguments, to those philosophical arguments, those are things that immigrant rights spaces are really pushing for in the United States. And I hope that they will increasingly push for in Europe as well, is really trying to reframe these conversations of from a social justice issue, or just a humanitarian issue, but also from an equity perspective and from an economic inclusion perspective.
Thank you very much. Quite insightful from the two speakers. We are really gaining a lot, and I hope this is going to trigger more conversations to even other experts in the same field. Wherever they are, they can begin the conversations. How can the refugee issue move from being looked as a humanitarian crisis issue to a social justice, to an economic justice issue? Yeah, this is quite interesting. So one next question would be, why are states building the walls? Why are we having electric, deep trenches all over? Why are states restricting the entry of migrants or refugees into their countries? Sometimes I feel states are turning a blind eye to the people who are really suffering, but then it also comes with a lot of questions. Why are they leaving their states? So how can states control their borders to ensure that there is no entry and exit of these migrants? Do you want to start, Brittany?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a particularly poignant response, except for global North countries they can build walls, they can, have restrictive migration policies, because as of now, they're not impacted themselves by being refugees. And, I think it also just has like it's legacies of colonialism, it's legacies of racism, it's legacies of anti-migrant, anti-refugee, nativist traditions. And the US political spaces, these go back hundreds of years. There's entire PhDs on people talking about how the early European settlers and migrants that came to the United States, were systematically deculturalized for generations. And that meant stripping their language away, stripping their religions away in order to make them, a part of the white American Protestant ideal within generations. And I think that continues to be a lot of the narrative of integration. And I think integration policy is trying to shift from that. But I think that that is still kind of our political tradition here in the United States is, why don't they learn English? And, and even though that is not our national language, we don't have a national language in the United States. English is not our national language. We still have debates at school boards about teaching Spanish, which is a huge language here in the United States. And so, I think that all of these reasons, I think that also the far right on immigrant and refugee policy in the United States have really been able to mainstream their ideas. These ideas that were never mainstreamed in our media have increasingly become mainstream on news networks like Fox News, but also on CNN. They go to far right, organizations increasingly to get a balanced, quote unquote, story, when a lot of our national organizations are saying, no, these are extremists. These are extremists. You should not quote them. You should not cite them. You should not reference them. But, also a lot of those leaders were in the Trump administration. And so, they were mainstreamed by our president, and with the idea that what they wanted to do as quickly as possible was to build a wall, and to restrict immigration, including legal immigration. And so, I think here in the United States, at least, we really have to contend with the fact that this is a lot of historical political legacy in a lot of our communities. There's a reason that Trump was elected. We are an incredibly racist country, and really need to contend with that. And I think that Europe is hopefully going to go through a similar process. I think that these are the conversations we're having increasingly in the immigration space here in the United States, is how do we really start to unpack the fact that we have to change these mainstream narratives from being very anti-migrant and anti-refugee to humanizing, like you said, Juliana, humanizing communities that are looking to move, which is something like humans have done for all of history, so how do we do that? And I think that some of the work that I did in Berlin last year around strategic communications and narrative change, started to unpack that. I think that those organizations that are working in Europe doing that work, there's organizations here in the United States doing that work. What they're finding is that leading with data, which speaks to me and may speak to many people in this Zoom meeting, as well as speaks to many government leaders, business leaders, does not really speak to the broader population. And so if you really want to counter populism and right-wing anti-immigrant, anti-refugee narratives, you really have to lead with messages that are framing ideals, including the fact that we are, we value freedom, we value families being safe, families being together. And so these are the messages that I think organizations in the US are increasingly starting to lead with. You can include data, but it has to be on the back end. And you have to target specific populations that we call the movable middle, because we're losing them to the right. We're losing them to the extremist views. And so we really need to get to them first and not just speak to our own audiences that are already in alliance with our views. We have to really get out into the rural areas of the United States and have door-to-door conversations with people to really start moving national migration and refugee resettlement policy to be more humane. I think that unfortunately that just takes time as well. I think that funders are just starting to realize that this is this where to move into, but I'm hopeful that in the next 5 to 10 years we'll start seeing that happen, and we'll start to be able to really chip away at the right wing's hold on migration and refugee narratives. I think that it helps that cities have inserted them into the process as well, because they have been so pro migrant and refugee, but time will tell. And I think I'm hopeful that, we won't be building any more walls. But, I think that if certain people get elected, they will if they can, and that's what we need to be fighting. So.
Politics again, but I like your idea. We move towards working with the movable middle. That's a very nice idea, picking it strongly. Dr. Kasily, your views?
Yes, I'm afraid I may repeat what she has said, but I think this situation was foreseen in mid-60s by a scholar, Samuel Huntington, who came up with a book on a clash of civilization. And then, of course, on the eve of collapse of the Cold War, and of course the demise of Soviet Union, another scholar, Professor Fukuyama, came up with the end of history and the last man. Yes, so from those viewpoints, what is informing countries to build walls or barricades or transit centers in the sea? One issue is terrorism. One issue is terrorism. Of course, you have mentioned violent extremism. Yes, those are the main ones that inform this hardening of borders. There's also drugs. Of course, counterfeits, which and the contrabands that affect the economy, the national economy, and of course deny tax revenues due to the governments. So those are some of the additions I will put forth. And of course, what we Britain had, hopefully I've pronounced it correctly, the rising nationalism and the right groups that they want, there's a field that they have not benefited from globalization, and they want to maximize the national economies in exclusion of others. So those are the viewpoints that informs, of course, the local politics, whipping emotions to elect people to fulfill the desires of closing borders. So as she has said, we need to rally our support diplomatically and the pressure groups, lobbyists, to rally mass so that we can have governments reverse their positions, so that we can, of course, protect persons in refugee affairs. We say persons of concern to the government, of course, to UNHCR. So that would be the best way to go. And then, of course, Another issue is, of course, the refugees are seen as a burden, just consuming the resources that were meant maybe for the citizens. Now we have additional people, we have to build additional classrooms, medical facilities, playgrounds. So that is also, but that is not a really issue where I am here. The host community here had been left many years behind. And through the refugee operations, they are able now to access schools nearby. So whatever the politicians say may not be wholly or fully the truth is not. Thank you very much.
Juliana, you're on mute.
You're muted, Juliana. We can't hear you.
Sorry, apologies for that. Yeah, very interesting conversations. Walls are being built and people do not want to hear the other side. It's quite interesting that people look for power to protect themselves rather than looking at the other people who are crying on the other side. So now, just to the two of you, where do we draw the line now? How do we ensure that states are also protected and that the rights and the dignity of refugees are also upheld? Because yes, I agree with you. If the security of our state is threatened, then the leaders have to respond. They have either to build walls, they have to repatriate people. In other cases, it has to turn into people being arrested. So where do we draw the line? How can states ensure that their security is upheld and the rights of the refugees is also upheld? So do we start with Brittany?
I think it's in part reframing what these potential solutions to security concerns are. I think that when President Trump built a wall, there came out and said this will not work. Like this will not keep out the flow of people that you're intending to keep out. It will also destroy environmental zones. The US-Mexico border area is a national refuge, or parts of it are a national refuge for monarch butterflies, and it'll create, it'll devastate that environmental ecosystem. It'll be a huge cost burden that maybe there are different solutions to. So, I for one, I have a lot of, I guess, maybe I'm an idealist. I know Dr. Kasily has been talking about realism, and I'm more realist than I used to be. But, to me, I think that most people are just trying to reunite with family, and they're trying to find a better job, and they're trying, there's specific push-pull factors that are pretty common in most situations of migration or refugee displacement is, like they are coming for work, they're coming to reunite with community, with family, they're leaving a place because they can't stay any. Coming for those reasons.
We lost you a bit. Brittany, you are breaking.
Oh, sorry.
But now we can hear you.
Okay. So I think that, if I'm sure that with this, there are ways for them to ensure security protocols are implemented. But I think that the reality is there isn't the political will to spend those resources or to do the work. And so I think it's a matter of, hopefully, culture shifts over time, and we start seeing migrants and refugees as vital parts of all of our communities, and that migration has been something that's happened for hundreds and thousands of years. And that takes time. And I think that that again comes back to a lot of the narrative change work that I'm seeing increasingly being prioritized here in the United States within the immigration policy spaces, is really shifting funding to start investing and shifting the narratives at the local level. And I think as we do that, hopefully we'll see enough, political pressure on our national leaders to invest in the kind of real world solutions that are humanizing. And if security is a real concern, that also provides security. I don't think walls do it. I don't think within the United States current immigration system, making people from certain countries wait 20 some years to reunite with their families, I don't think that that does it. I think, and I don't think that making people, deporting families, breaking families apart, is doing it either. So hopefully over time, we can continue to move that narrative at the local level so that we have more pressure at the national.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Doctor?
Thank you very much. Yes, the refugees move across frontiers through social networks. They go normally where the kinsmen are. That's how they move across the frontiers. The solution lies in what they call human security concept that informed the Millennium Development Goals and the successor Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, what is also commonly referred to as Agenda 2030. As far as refugees and migrants are concerned, there is what Britain had mentioned, Global Compact on Refugees and Migrants. Then, of course, there's Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, also known as New York Declaration. We in the Horn of Africa and what we call Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, we have had 4 declarations on this. One on livelihood, one on returnees, and of course, human rights protection, focusing mainly on Somalis. We also have had Djibouti Declaration on Education, and then also Kampala Declaration on Livelihood. And of course, we have had in Nairobi 2 declarations that took place on 6th and 7th of this month. So the regional approach will be key. Other than doing it singly, you rather adopt the regional approach in line with what they call Global Compact on Refugees and the CRRF. Now, those 2 approaches also emphasizes on burden sharing. Then, of course, durable solutions of resettlement, local integration or assimilation. Then, of course, voluntary repatriation once those countries realize stability. So that is the approach I want maybe to emphasize and share with us. And also, as much as we focus on the persons of concern or migrants and refugees, much attention also should be given to the stabilization and the building accountable governance structures in those countries, so that we can stem the outflow of the refugees. And we can also, they say West East, home is the best, so that these refugees can really return to their countries of origin. So much effort should also be focused on the stabilization and of course accountable institutions that will also promote human rights, of course, and human security. But however, human rights, Madam has said it was universal. In my own studies, I found that in the Middle East, they isolated themselves from human rights. Yes, so it may be universal, but it's not fully impressed in the Saudi Arabia Peninsula. So that is also what I came to find out also. So yes, we need to focus on SDGs, Agenda 2030, human security concept, regional approach, not externalization that is being fronted by the likes of Denmark and Britain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasily. I can see more members are still joining us. You are welcome for you to enjoy the conversation. So quickly, allow me to invite our third expert, Mr. Kennedy Munari, for a case study as we prepare to have now the last session of the Sustainable Solutions Towards Building an Inclusive Society, which appreciates the refugee population. So I'm told that Kennedy has a presentation, and looking at our time, we have around 32 minutes to go. So Kennedy, you are welcome. We have our technical person, Mr. Arun. Can you kindly share the presentation with us, sorry. And then Mr. Kennedy, we would give you 7 minutes to take us through your case clinic.
Okay, thank you so much. I would wish to share a more simplified version that I'm having. So I'd like to request Aaron to pull down the one that he has just shared so that I can share. Okay, thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you so much. I'd also like to reintroduce myself. I'm Kennedy Munari from Kenya. I'm an education emergence specialist. Currently, I'm focusing much on higher education for refugees, more particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and global South in general. I'd like to acknowledge that we are facing the biggest refugee and displacement crisis of our time. As the previous speaker had suggested, that we are facing biggest crisis more bigger than that one of World War II. And this is not just a crisis of numbers, it is also a crisis of solidarity. You know, these are statements that was used by former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon when was calling for global solidarity, which really points out to the urgent need for an appropriate action to find durable solution for the rising number of persons of concerns. This is mainly refugees, internal displaced persons, and asylum seekers. Before, as I progress, I'd like to share a 1-minute clip to, I think, to emphasize on what I'm talking about. So kindly please allow me to share this clip before I continue.
My name is Wayne James Dam, a South Sudanese refugee in Uganda's Bidibidi refugee settlement. For the past 4 years, I have been hunting down scholarships to quench my thirst and hunger for higher education. But every time I apply for scholarship, I always go through. But I always keep my head up when knowing that the education will come through and not for everyone. But for the black person, 4 years ago, when I first applied for scholarship, I thought I was on the right track, achieving my dreams and goals. But instead, this is what I got. same such scenario keeps on repeating itself every year, not for me alone, but for 1,000 other refugees around the world. Giving up on their dreams every day, the refugee comes. People no longer fight for their dreams. A day passes by, the dream is gone due to limited learning opportunities. But the question we should ask ourselves is, how can we provide
Okay, thank you so much. The big question is, how can we provide lifelong learning for all? This includes refugees and asylum seekers. So we conclude that a refugee may not always have the same access to higher education as other immigrants. This includes non-refugee migrants. So this is due to a variety of obstacles that can be overcome if all parties involved take their responsibility seriously. From global statistics, a young refugee must overcome tremendous obstacles to obtain higher education, and just 1 in 100 succeed. So refugee higher education has just recently gained the attention of the world leaders as part of humanitarian response. You realize that most of the intervention will mainly focus on basic education. So this is partly owing to the UNHCR 2012-2016 education strategy, which identified higher education for refugees as a critical focus area for the first time. So I'd like to talk about the case of Uganda. And Uganda is one of the countries that has one of the progressive policy concerning regarding refugees. And refugees in Uganda, they enroll in higher education, but they are largely absent in our national data. So there is no comprehensive statistic on refugee access to higher education. So refugees are not barred from enrolling in higher education in Uganda if they can afford it. So there are numerous barriers that refugee children are facing. This is financial barriers. So you realize even recognition of documents is also another challenge for admitting refugee in higher education. So a small percentage of refugees are able to attend university. Or those living in settlement in particularly are unlikely able to afford university education, as wealthy refugees tend to live outside settlement. So many children and youth miss school as a result of increased demand on infrastructure caused by displacement. We'll talk about Uganda is also a third world country and with a limited resources. So integrating refugee into education system also becomes a challenge to Uganda as a country, a country that is also struggling in terms of capacity. The next slide, also presenting, the next slide talk about the challenges that I've just highlighted, talk about the refugees information and lack of guidance, because they are in the new environment. So access to information sometimes become quite hard. We also have host country limited resources to expand higher education for refugees, language barrier, difficulties in getting foreign qualification recognized in the host country, and financial difficulties. All these are the challenges that refugees are facing, but they're not limited to that. So talk about the provision of higher education to refugees in Uganda becoming so challenging as the number of long-term refugees have increased. So these young people are likely to end up as part of host country unskilled, illegal, and underpaid labor force. As of potential recruits for conventional or irregular groups. So this, I think this is an eye-opener to key stakeholders in refugee matters to also increase funding and also prioritize higher education for refugees or the persons of concerns. I think apart from that, there are other initiatives and or interventions that also provide opportunities for refugees in accessing higher education. So we talk about the UNHCR DAFI scholarship program, which has been a long, valuable source of higher education opportunity for refugees. And however, in the last 10 years, a number of initiatives have emerged, ranging from small programs serving small cohort in specific camps or countries to larger online providers with potential to provide higher education level course to an unlimited number of people. But often without support or face-to-face contact, the twin crises in Uganda have prompted a fury new projects. So we have, I think, a statistics that shows the number of programs in Uganda that supports refugee children to access higher education. We have the DAFI, which is providing, supporting more refugees to access higher education. We also have the Student Refugee Program, the UK Master, also Window Scholarship, they're also providing and also working here in Kenya to help refugees in accessing higher education. We talk about the UK Masters Program, and since its inception in 2009, the UK Master Program has helped over 100 students to pursue master's degrees in the United Kingdom, and also youth from the northern, eastern, and Karamoja area who are impacted by the Lord Resistance Army insurgents are also eligible for this program. We also talk about the Student Refugee Program, and which was started in 2018 by the World University Service for Canada, and also partnered with the Window Trust to provide more opportunity for refugees to access higher education. Okay, basically that is what I'm like to share with you. And also as I progress, I also like to share more pictures to, I think, to emphasize on what I've talked about. This is what to talk about the forced migration. You can see people around moving, carrying luggages, and also that is how camps look like. And we also talk about the refugees. These are secondary students, refugees, the Sudanese refugees in Uganda attending class under the tree, and also refugees in camp. These are primary, the Congolese refugees. I'd like to say thank you. That is mark the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kennedy Munari, for bringing out the real scenarios of the refugee struggles in different parts, and especially in African setup. I think in reality is that apart from the political, the security, the humanitarian crisis, we are also building towards a sustainable future. That's why we brought in this case study here, trying to build how best can states build the refugee population towards education. So next is the heaviest part of this discussion, and I hope we are going to take at most 10 to 15 minutes. And I would like to hear from the three speakers. Now that we've seen the struggles that we are facing in terms of the conventions, instruments, laws, and the many challenges that states are facing in terms of addressing refugee crisis. So which is the way forward? What are some of the sustainable solutions that we can build through the refugee population? How can we build a future through these people? Rather than seeing them as enemies, how can we now build our economies through these people? And I would like to start with Brittany, then Dr. Kasily, then Kennedy Munari, in that order.
Thank you. So I mean, I think that sustainable solutions are hopefully like kind of, I don't know exactly how to say this, but I think that the best approach is through really pushing through and against, anti-migrant, anti-refugee narratives in many parts of the global north, and really like leveraging that to shift national policy and international policy that is more welcoming and inclusive of refugees and migrants. I think what you have been saying, Juliana, around reshifting, the perspective of refugees as a constant crisis or as a constant problem, and utilizing messages and also data to show that these are communities that are necessary in many parts of the global north, where populations are declining and we need workers, and that maybe investing in other avenues of international development, so that communities also feel like they have opportunities, as Dr. Kasily said, from a regional perspective, and either being able to go back to their homes, or being able to stay within a region of where their home country is. And so I'm optimistic that can happen. I think that we are going to see rising refugee movement, migration movements as a result of climate change and as a result of continued globalization. I'm hopeful that people's humanity and sense of shared humanity will shift us. I also think that we have to really counter those anti-migrant and anti-refugee narratives in very intentional ways, and through very intentional investing in what is often called like narrative infrastructure, so that we can actually shift these narratives at a national level and an international level. I'm hopeful that we can do that. I think it's a process, and I look forward to working on that in the future.
Thank you very much, Brittany, for the insights. Dr. Kasily?
Thank you very much. Yes. The way forward lies with what we had said earlier on: global compact, comprehensive refugee response framework, of course, regional approach. Then also on education here, we are also put in place with the assistance of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, recognition of prior learning. And then of course on addressing issues of language barrier, we have interpreters. But of course the way forward here is to align the national statutes with what the countries have entered into as international covenants or treaties and agreement, so that we speak from one voice of coherence. And then of course, skills development, a startup capital, freedom of movement, especially in Africa here, they are restricted. We do not have the equivalent of Schengen here. And then of course, marketplace, where the host community, the refugees or persons of concern, they can sell their skills, their wares, commodities, either of course also embracing innovative technologies to sell online. Here we have the hand baskets, and then there are people who are also tailors here. They are also contributing in a way to the local economy here. And for us here, a research of the World Bank has shown that if refugees left Turkana County, where they live here, 220,000, 13 individuals from 25 different nationalities from Asia, Middle East, and of course across Africa. If they left, there will be a gap of 3% GDP that even Kenyans, even if they were to replace them, will not breach. And this was a research done by IFC, International Finance Corporation. Of course, here we are also developing what they call Huduma Biashara Center, a business service center, so that there's information on what to sell in a marketplace, and of course, registration will be made easier. Of course, we have here also greenhouses and irrigation systems that we allocate to refugees and the host community, and they're able to start a livelihood. We also have some cottage industries, people manufacturing soap, and these are refugees. Then, of course, as Madam had said earlier on, resettlement to address labor shortages in those countries that have negative demographics. Then, of course, here, through the skills development, of course, they will seek and create employment opportunities, not only for other refugees, but also the host community members. Of course, like most other countries in Africa here, these refugees are settled in hardship area or marginal lands, almost experience desert conditions. So green economy, of course, renewable energy is the way forward, so that we can also reduce on consumption or use of fuel wood that is disastrous. Then, of course, assimilation, they can be naturalized, like what the US does through green card or local assimilation. Of course, once they have gained these skills here, they can also voluntarily, if there is stability in their countries of origin, go back with the skills and contribute to the national economies of those countries. So those are some of the suggestions I will give. But on education here, we have similar strategies here, and we also have a component of scholarship going to the host community members. And those refugees that obtain at ordinary level of education, who score grade B and above, they are given education scholarship and overseas, either in Australia, Canada, or the US, and the whole family will go with that individual. And once they're able to complete their education, they are settled there to address what Madam had talked about. So that is will be the way to go, but also regional approach to solving these issues, other than one country doing it alone, building barriers. It will not do. Even barriers, they can be breached. They can dig trenches or underground tunnels. Then, of course, join the citizenry here. But also these communities, some of them speak the language of the nations that they are seeking asylum in. So you are not able easily to distinguish who is a refugee and who is a host community. And this is what the situation here in Kakuma and Kalvei. You cannot tell who is a refugee in a marketplace. They are selling vegetables, the barber shop, they have workshops, there are bakeries, so you can't tell who is a refugee and who is a host community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasily, for the comprehensive ideas that you've shared with us. I think I think you are inclined more into, of course, what we are looking at ensuring that the refugees are accepted. We provide the available opportunities in the host countries, and we ensure that they, of course, have an ample environment to thrive. Whatever skills that they can gain, even if they have to be repatriated, then they can still go build their economy from their state. There's a very beautiful case study in Tanzania where one of the former president realized they had a very serious refugee population in Tanzania, in East Africa. And what he did, since he saw that the country had a huge piece of land, he told them, let these refugees just be given ID cards, let them be given pieces of land, and then let them settle in. Allow them get employed, allow them work, allow them build our economy. So I don't know whether the other states can do the same. Kennedy, any word on the same?
Okay, thank you so much. I think voluntary repatriation and reintegration is preferred as a durable solution for displaced population. Also, we are talking about the 4R, that is recognition, redistribution, reintegration, and the other R forgotten. So it's an approach to address the immediate, medium, and long-term development need for returning displaced people in a comprehensive and integrated manner. So above all, I also like to suggest that we to call upon the international community to recognize higher education or education in general in a United Nations peace building agenda. Because we talk about the only thing that refugee needs is empowerment, so that they can not only survive, but also to strive in their new environment. So I think vocational training and also higher education is also quite important in a peace building agenda. Once refugees get these skills, it will help them in the host countries, and when they will be repatriated back in their own countries, they'll be able to use those skills in building back better. So I think that is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kennedy. I think I got some technical issues. I cannot start my video. Anytime I try to start it, it tells me that I cannot start my video. But I hope you can all hear me. So now we've come to the end of the conversation, but before I close it, I would like to open the space to our participants. If you have any questions and comments and ideas that you want to input into our conversation, you are highly invited. Welcome, Natalia. Welcome, Kefa. We have Natasha, Rachel. Yeah, thank you. You've been very patient with us. If you have any questions, you'd like to get some feedback from our experts, the floor is all yours. You can raise your hand, or you can just go straight to the questions.
Yes, if you can hear me, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so my question is the refugee crisis or the immigrant crisis that we experience and continue to experience in the world is the flame, but the kindling could be economic stability and wars and all that. So is it possible to have into policy that these big refugee organizations, the UNHCR, the NRC, and the rest, launch counteroffensive on a policy level to these causative agents? Because we saw, like with the Libya migrant crisis, we saw a situation whereby the deputy PM Italy was castigating France for destabilizing Francophone Africa, and for that reason, there are so many people trying to cross the sea, and then it was Italy now bearing the burden. So is it possible to have, again, from a policy level, measures to stem down on these elements that cause the refugee crisis?
Thank you, Kefa. Brittany?
I think that those are conversations that, need to be had. I think you're completely right that, there are push and pull factors that, cause migration and refugee crises, and there are things that we can do to help alleviate that as an international community or as national communities. And I'm sure that those conversations are being had on some level at the international level with the International Migration Organization and UNHCR and many of those organizations. I would hope that they're inserting themselves into those conversations around how do we prevent conflict, how do we develop conflict resolution, how do we invest in equitable development in many parts of the world that are either in crises or potentially in prevention of crises. And so I think that there's also going to be stressors on that with climate change, as climate change itself is said to going to be increasing conflict because an increasing lack of resources, or increasing refugee crisis because home communities are not going to be habitable or economically viable anymore. So I think the other thing I would add is that I have seen the international organizations, international funders are increasingly moving because they've seen the rise of a lot of right-wing populists, whether in the United States and parts of Europe, Turkey, Russia, and other parts of the world, that they are increasingly starting to shift their funding to really counter that those moves towards right-wing populism through funding specifically democratic efforts in hopefully many parts of the world. And so I think that that's a positive sign that international funders are thinking in terms of how do we address the rise of these anti-migrant, anti-refugee, but also anti-democratic narratives. And so I know specifically like the Open Society Foundation, which is a huge international funder, is increasingly moving into that direction. And really, how do you build democratic infrastructure in countries around the world so that we don't see the rise of right-wing totalitarian leadership, political leadership that moves us into these very polarized narratives around migration. So, and other topics, so not just migration. So I'm hopeful that will hopefully make a difference in these conversations as well going forward.
Thank you very much, Brittany, for the response. For the purposes of time, I can see it's already 8:30. I'm going to allow all the participants who have their hands up to ask their questions, and then I'll give all the experts an opportunity to respond to maybe the questions that will be raised at once. Maybe, and I hope we can finalize this in the next 5 to 10 minutes, just to respect your time. Yeah, so I'll start with Safari, then Natalia, then we end with Rachel, and then all the experts will respond to the questions in random. And if Kasily and Kennedy, you have any input on the previous raised question, please do. So Safari.
Thank you. I really appreciate to be able to attend this meeting. As I said, I'm Safari. I've been a refugee for 14 years in Uganda, and I thank God I'm here now in Norway. My question is, Madam Juliana was talking about a really refugee human being. So being a refugee in Uganda and knowing what is happening there, a refugee is getting less than $10 a month. And my question is, because I'm here now, I've been in Uganda as a refugee. Now, a refugee surviving in $10 a month, how can we be their voice, and how can we change this? Because it's really hard to live on $10 a month. Another question maybe, then I'll be short because of time. I've been serving refugees in Rwamwanja refugee settlement. In Uganda, we call them refugee settlement, whereby it has more than 65,000 refugees, and they only have like less than 5 schools, only primary schools, no even one secondary school. Then you wonder, after primary school, what next? So how can we help these people to assess? I really appreciated the presentation of, is it Mr. Kennedy? People are really suffering. Refugees are really suffering in that side of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Safari. I'll go straight to Natalia. Natalia?
So thank you very much for all the presentations. I wasn't able to hear all of them, but I grasped the narrative from the conversation and some of the presentation that but just wanted to make a comment. So I'm calling you from Bulgaria, and in terms of involving of refugees in programs, as I'm working for the Erasmus Plus program, which is an EU program for education, we have in the program is given this opportunity for extending education for lifelong learning of refugees. Unfortunately, what I see is that there are not many refugees that are taking part because it's on one side, refugees needs to be proactive. But on all the circumstances which the society is giving them, it's still a burden in terms of this, that Fortress Europe is sometimes not very proactive to skill-oriented approach of these refugees, which we face. And the next comment, it's not a comment, just a reflection, is what I see in terms of policy development, trying to comparing on sustainable development, let's say, I see that we are not doing a lot in this time of crisis that we have now with Syria, with other forms of streams of refugees along the border. But what is interesting for me is that a lot of Bulgarian writers, art itself, is trying to respond to this situation. And we see a lot of fictions where the narrative is towards this, a lot of movies, because this makes impression. This means a lot for the society itself. I think we should not say bright future, but at least we see that these societies they experience empathy, which is somehow a good, a positive view, which we can say. Just a comment from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. Rachel? Rachel, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so my name is Rachel Vichey from Kenya, and thank you for joining this session. I'm the Impact Field Host for Migration and also a member of Bosch Alumni Network. And if I can go straight to my question, is that our topic was building from crisis to sustainable development, the 2030 agenda. So I'm asking, like, we are like 8 years shy to 2030. Will this realized or is just a mirage? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'll hand over now to the speakers, Brittany, Kasily, and Kennedy, in that order.
So I can respond. Rachel, your question is, for me, it's almost rhetorical, just because I don't have a lot of faith in our international political organizations or leaders. I think that, I come from a community organizer background, if you will. Like, I really think that the way that we move is by building movements and pushing our leaders to really move in the direction we want them to be in. And so I think in response to that, Natalia, you were talking about utilizing arts and culture. And I think that that's something that is increasingly being pulled into the strategic communications and narrative change space around more positive migration and refugee narratives in the United States. I think I put into the chat one specific organization that is explicitly doing that, the Butterfly Lab at Race Forward, which is a racial justice organization in the United States. And narrative change generally is something, it's where you really utilize data about the movable middle to really start targeting those narratives and then utilizing, hopefully, arts and culture to really shift culture over time. And because, we've seen that happen in the United States with the Me Too movement, with marriage equality for LGBT community members so that they can get married to the people that they love. And we've seen that more recently with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so all of those movements in the United States utilize principles of narrative change as well as arts and culture. In terms of education and training, one of the areas of work that I've worked in is workforce development, specifically with a lot of immigrant and refugee communities here in the United States. And I can just say on a couple of things is one, it's a matter of host countries recognizing credentials that migrants and refugees may come to the United States with. I know that I specifically worked with the Syrian population here in the US, and when they came very highly educated, but had a very difficult time integrating into our workforce because our local employers and our local universities didn't know how to recognize their higher education credentials. Then it's also, obviously, language learning into whatever host community that is. And so if that's in the United States, it's typically English, but also recognizing that sometimes some jobs need less of those English skills or less of those German skills if you're in Germany than you may think that they'd need, and giving space for people to either be trained in, a vocational program that is designed for language learning, but also maybe scaffolding, whether do they need to be fluent English speakers to drive trucks in the United States? They probably don't. They probably just need enough to get to work, and then they'll learn English over time. So those are some of the things that are increasingly best practices in the United States that we're looking at from a workforce perspective. And then of course, it's just a matter of getting people recognized based on immigration status and if they can get workforce dollars in our federal system. And sometimes those systems are incredibly inflexible. I know in Germany, I think that this is something that they're still dealing with. They have a very inflexible system. And so really getting people who are not coming from a K-12, from a primary school all the way up into secondary school into their workforce system. They may be coming at 20 years old or at 25 years old or at 40 years old. And how do you get them into that workforce system when they're coming from non-traditional pathways? And so it's really building in flexibility and then recognizing what credentials they have and then making sure that we're not creating barriers through language learning. And so Kennedy, thank you for your presentation. I think that was fantastic. I also think that we're in the United States increasingly looking at the use of technology to provide vocational education and training, as well as English language learning training. And so I think that, everyone has a smartphone these days, and or most people have smartphones, or most people have some version of internet and, computer connection. And how do we utilize those technologies so that, we equalize educational opportunity on some level, wherever someone may be. So.
Thank you. Dr. Kasily?
Thank you, Madam. I'll be very brief. Yes, I think it was Kefa. You talked of counter-offensive. I don't know whether you were once in a military class. Yes, but yes, there is policies, and the policies we have spoken to include a comprehensive refugee response framework and the regional approach. And in the East African region, we have had the declarations, Nairobi 1, Djibouti Declaration, Kampala, and then Nairobi too. So those are some of the measures that are in place. On Safari, yes, here in Kakuma and Kalbey, we have 68% enrollment, and none of the refugees and the host communities study under the trees. They're all in class. However, the classroom space is not sufficient, and we have morning class and afternoon class with the two sets of teachers, the morning teachers and the afternoon teachers. And those refugees that are not able to get enrollment in those schools, we give them movement pass for 1 year to study elsewhere, either on scholarship or self-sponsored. So of course, the language for instruction here is English and of course Kiswahili. But as Madame Britain has talked of innovative technologies here, we have the support of Google, Microsoft, and then of course we have Vodafone, who are here with the tablets and very impressive. And normally these refugees from Kakuma top the performance in the county of Turkana and elsewhere where they go to study. This year alone, about 500 or so have obtained a scholarship for resettlement overseas. On Natalia, yes, EU, now the education now is a human right. And of course, priority is not given to sustainable development goals. I wish SDGs were given priority. It will make a whole difference. On radio, yes, we have moved away, like us here, away from emergency response to humanitarian development, and we have partners who are not in emergency response who have come on board, and this includes IFC, UNFL, and even commercial banks are here to lend the credit to refugees and host community to be able to start a business so that we lessen the dependence on donor support. Yes, there was a refugee who spoke here. Yes, here is not $10. It is about $20, but all said and done, living on $20 in 30 days is below the humanitarian standard of the poverty index level of $1.9. So that is the situation here. But I will share with you my presentation through Juliana, so that those who want to interact with what would have been my presentation can do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasily. And lastly, we have Kennedy Munari. Do you have any input to the raised questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Juliana. First, I'd like to respond to Safari's question, talking about a few primary schools or schools within in a refugee settlement. I think Uganda represents one of the countries that is hosting refugee, and it is under-resourced country. And also Uganda also have been facing various challenges. And you also understand that Uganda has also faced, has been also hit by simultaneous crises. South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi. You're also talking about the Afghan refugees also arrived in Uganda. And also at the same time, that Uganda also is struggling with the effect of internal displaced people who are housed in camps during the crisis that hit Uganda like a decade ago. They have now returned to their homes. They are or have been relocated. However, the long-term viability of the return is in question. Even though the region has been at peace since 2006, returns rate have surpassed the recovery planning and implementation. Also talking about the Rachel's question, whether we talk about the realization of implementation of the global policy. So we look at the countries formulate policies and implementation of policy differs with the countries. Although we have global policies that provide framework through which signatory state must conform, but now the problem is that these policies are not legally enforceable. So it's high time that we call upon the global actors and intergovernmental organizations to intervene and establish, continue to establish global policy documents and also call upon member states to enforce them. I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, our participants. We are highly humbled by your participation, and special regards goes to Brittany, Dr. Kasily, and Kennedy Munari for finding your time to share with us the beautiful ideas on this huge global crisis. The migration impact field will host a series of conversations still on migration and refugees. And we are looking forward to hear more from you as either participants or in whatever capacity you can participate in future. To our participants, thank you for finding time. 1 hour, 30 minutes is not easy. We've even gone past 30 minutes and we highly appreciate that. So thank you. Let's keep the conversation going. We are going to put together the today's session in a report, in a very brief report, and I hope that you are going to interact with the report in future once it's complete. So thank you.